Hello, you guys. It's Andrea, your host for From Mrs. to Ms. I have a special guest with us today. Her name is Wendi Dumbroff. I'm very excited to have you. Welcome, Wendi. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So, Wendi is a licensed professional counselor in private practice. She specializes in individual, family, couples, and sex therapy. And she's a highly trained couple and sex therapist who provides a safe, non judgmental, and sex positive environment. Love that. So I'm super excited to have you because on my show, I like to talk about, stuff coming out after divorce and people getting back into finding their rhythm, finding who they're going to be with, and sex, basically. But I'm not an expert. So
Yeah.
I'm happy to have you on. That can help me out. And people might take you a little bit more seriously than they do me because I
Uh,
just talk about my own stuff. So, but
that's important.
let's start at the beginning. So, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved with the career in couples and sex therapy, and what types of therapy do you do most frequently?
Yeah, sure. So, being a therapist is actually a second career for me. I went
Oh,
back to school almost 20 years ago now.
okay.
Before that, my undergraduate work was I was a pharmacist by my degree, and I worked in
Okay.
pharmaceutical sales. And I never regret that education for 1 minute because understanding the body and understanding how the drugs work and everything is always helpful to me as a therapist.
Yeah.
And I was just a mom for a long time. I still am a mom. And I did that. And then when I was thinking about again what I wanted to do as my children were getting older, I decided to go back to school. This was an old interest to be a therapist.
Good for
Something
you.
I looked into even in my 20s, and I was in my early 40s when I went back to school with a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old at the time.
Wow.
And yeah, and so I've never regretted a day of it. And how I got into family therapy and couple therapy first was one of my mentors, one of my supervisors in my training had in my internship as I was still going through the process of school, had trained at the Ackerman Institute in New York City, and she was such an amazing therapist and she had such incredible insights. And I thought, oh my God, if I could be 10% as good as she is, then I'm going to be a great therapist.
Yeah,
So,
makes all the difference.
yeah, so
Yeah.
followed in her footsteps, and I did my postgraduate training at the Ackerman in family and couple therapy. And then I found that doing couples work, one of the biggest issues that comes up is sex.
Yeah.
And I thought, I really need to know more about this. So subsequent to my training at the Ackerman, I did a post-grad training in sex therapy. And, I've just been plugging along and learning. I love learning.
I
So
bet it's new every day. Every time you get new people in, right? You're going to learn different things about different people, how they work, and you got to kind of figure out a way to help them. Right.
absolutely.
Absolutely. So what can people expect when they come to see you? Like, what would be your normal approach for a couples therapy?
Yeah. So, I meet with all the couples for a longer session for the first session because I find there's so much, probably 2 hours would be better, but usually it's an hour and a half for a first session. And I like to get the lay of the land. I want to know, even though I may have spoken to one or both of them beforehand, I want to know why they're coming. What's bringing them here now? Why right now? Why
Yeah.
right? The couple has been married for 30 years, that they've been fighting for 30 years, but why now? you know
Yeah.
and um and I and what I do, the way I work is very relational, it's very systemic. And what I really try and pull out and understand is what happens between people. It's not like it's not a linear thing like, well, if she just would stop, blah, 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 I wouldn't do this and we'd be fine. It's, well, when she does that, how do you feel? And then what do you do? And when you do that, how does she feel? And I'm being heterosexist here. I
Sure.
just want to comment that most of the couples I see are heterosexual couples, not all of them,
Yeah.
but
Like, apply to all. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And so, I try to interactionalize what happens between people. And I literally draw that out from them. I use a model called the vulnerability cycle created by Michelle Shankman and Mona Fishbane. And it really it is a circular model because every dynamic is co-created.
Okay,
And what is each person's part? Like, so would you like me to give you an
I
example
love it.
uh, of that?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So let's say that there is so let's say you have a heterosexual couple and the woman, let's say, has a history of abandonment, right?
Okay.
And when she feels like her partner is not present for her, maybe one of her parents absconded when she was a child, or there was just a lot of loss in her life, through death or through people choosing to leave. But what really triggers her is abandonment. So number one, I'm looking for what is triggering people,
Mhm.
right? So she tells me a little bit about her world, what's going on from her perspective, and I hear that, he wasn't present, whatever. Abandonment is her trigger. And what does she then do? Well, so I get really mad, and I you know he wasn't there. She may not recognize it as abandonment, but he wasn't there. And so, like, I was like yelling, like, why are you out all the time? Why are you out all the time?
Mhm.
And so let's say his trigger is he grew up in a chaotic home and it was always loud and people were screaming. And when he heard that, he just tried to be small and disappear. Right. And so he then shuts down.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah,
And the more he shuts down, the more she feels abandoned, the more she pursues, the more he feels anxiety because it's getting loud. So the more he shuts down.
they're
And in the
working
first
against each
session,
other.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Well, you can see it's like the perfect storm, right?
yeah,
And that loop is sustained,
yeah.
co-created, and they each have a part in that. And so what I do in a first session is primarily I try to pull out that dynamic and
Mm,
understand what's happening for people. I draw it out for them using the model that I spoke of.
mm.
And and so you can see it because nobody can help how they feel. Nobody, if somebody had a lot of loss in their childhood or abandoned by a parent, of course they're going to be triggered by that feeling of loss.
Yeah,
And if somebody grew up in such chaos, of course they're going to be triggered by all that loudness. And how did they learn to survive in their families? Well, that's the same survival strategy that they're using now, likely unconsciously.
yeah. So do you take those and kind of work with them one-on-one, or you kind of
Um,
find a way
yeah,
to put it together?
that's a great question. Both, I would
Yeah,
say. And it really depends on the couple.
yeah.
Some couples may need a little one-on-one. Some,
Mhm.
some are fine opening up and fully sharing together. And that's helpful because a lot of times most of the time, they know each other's story of growing up, but
Yeah.
there's nuance that they might not be aware of, or they might have never thought about how, I mean, the person themselves may not have made the connection of the past to what they do in the present. And
Mhm.
and so you want two things. You want to connect those pieces, the past, how the past informs the present. And then you also want the partners to have empathy, to grow their empathy for each other. Like, oh my God, I didn't realize what a big thing that was for you, that your father walked out when you were 6 and you never, you've hardly had any relationship, and I didn't realize how that informed now.
Yeah,
And that when I go out and I don't tell you where I am,
yeah.
you're like, you're
So a lot
afraid.
of times it's bringing out the communication between the two of them without them even really realizing it, right? Because they maybe don't have those intimate conversations to even know this. But for some
Yeah,
reason, I assume they feel safer talking to somebody else in a safe environment and can just openly
I, I
express
I
their
I
feelings.
hear that often.
Yeah.
That people are able to say things and express things in the presence of a third person,
Mhm.
that might not feel safe to do on their own.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I do want them to be able to do it on their own. I don't want them to have to come to me forever,
Yeah.
right? I want to give them the skills and create a new template for how they can be together.
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, so in your experience, when it comes to common challenges that couples face within intimacy and
Mhm.
sex, how do you typically address those issues? Are most people, I would assume, Because sex can be taboo for a lot of people. They maybe don't talk about it outside of the home, they don't want to air their dirty laundry. So are most people expressive in your sessions, or does it take you a while to kind of bring out of them? How do you work with
Yeah.
that?
So sex is a whole other separate exploration that I do with people.
Yeah.
Uh, Maybe they're saying we're coming for sex therapy, but then I meet with them and there's all this other stuff going on in the relationship, and you kind of have to work on that first
Yeah. Because
before
it's
you
kind
can.
of the catalyst to it, possibly, right? All this
Yeah,
other
because
stuff might be the catalyst to the sex issues.
definitely, because
Yeah.
you ask the question, wow, it sounds like you're really arguing a lot. How does this impact your intimate life? And often you're like, oh yeah,
Yeah, there's
that's a
that
problem, right?
too.
Or
Yeah.
interesting, may seem kind of counterintuitive, but sometimes that's the one area where couples do communicate, right? It's like,
Mm.
well, if we didn't have that, we wouldn't have anything. So,
Wow.
and sometimes, they really do have I've worked with a few couples like that. They have this great sexual connection, but the rest of their marriage is sort of in shambles. But when I work specifically on sex, that's when I definitely split the partners up to do a sexual history with
Okay.
each one. And I do that because I want them to, I think in general, people feel more comfortable talking one-on-one rather than
Yeah.
having their partner there. There may be things they don't want to say in front
Yeah.
of their partner. There may be things like, yeah, that boyfriend in college was the best sex I ever had.
Right.
They want
Yeah.
their husband to
Yeah.
hear that. So
Yeah.
so that's definitely a thing. And I also work with them to, whether we're just doing couples therapy or sex therapy, the way I like to do it is that whatever you say in here is private to the extent that you tell me it's private. And as long as both are on board with that, because if there's something I don't know,
Yeah.
then I can't help them. And the worst thing, of course, would be, are you going to tell me, someone going to tell me they're having an affair? And
Have you had that happen?
oh yeah,
Oh,
of course, of course, yeah.
and then so you're kind of blindsided by it, and then you've got
But
to kind of skirt around it with the other.
I'm not always so blindsided. Usually you can kind of get a gist of
Yeah.
that there's something happening or something going on.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. But that's why I say up front, so that I may hold a secret.
Yeah.
And so the other person doesn't feel duped by me. Why
Yeah.
didn't you tell me? Why would you? Now, of course, I would talk to the partner that was having the affair and say, how does that, it's hard to do couples work and improve your marriage when there's really, you're not fully present. There's
Yeah.
a third person in this relationship. And so we
Yeah.
would be up. But again, if I don't know that, how can I be helpful?
Wow. That's got to
But
be
this,
tricky.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, because
yeah,
often I would think that the other person that's coming, if they are having an affair, they're probably just obliging their other partner, right? By coming along with them. Yeah, I'll go and try counseling and leading them on to think that they're working on that when their head isn't really even in it.
yeah.
That's really
Not,
tough.
not always, not
Yeah,
always. Sometimes they do
they do want
want
to.
to, sometimes they do.
Yeah. Have you ever had anyone ask you to kind of be the one to tell the other person about the affair? Has that ever happened? I don't know why it's
Um,
a random
That
question.
was yeah, no, it makes a sensible question. I don't know. I don't think I've ever uh well, the only thing, the closest I've come to that is um helping the partner acknowledge, like, say they've uncovered something,
Hmm.
and to help them to know that yes, this is still going on, and yes, he or she plans on moving on.
Yeah.
And it's not, it's, they really don't want to do the couples work.
Yeah.
I've
Gosh.
had to say that, but yeah,
Oh, it's
yeah.
hard, right? It's a hard spot to be in, I would assume, a lot of
Mhm.
times. So, since you do a lot of the sex therapy stuff and you're very sex positive, can you kind of give us an idea what that means to be sex positive for those that are kind of just hearing that?
Sure. So sex positive is, I thought a lot about that when that question when you had shared some questions ahead of time with me,
Yeah.
and because I've never really defined it. And the
Hmm.
way that I do that, and it's a very common word in the sex therapy world, sex
Yeah.
positive.
Yeah.
And but I don't know that anybody's ever defined it. So I've thought a lot about that. I think it really means having an open space to talk about sex. Sex is welcome to be spoken about, and
Mhm.
also not pathologizing anybody's likes or wants or desires or what turns them on, that there is this broad spectrum of what's okay.
Yeah.
And nobody can help what turns them on. I can't tell you how many times or how much a part of this work de-shaming is porn, that is, like, it's just embarrassing that I look at this kind of porn. Why does this kind of porn turn me on? And
Mhm.
usually you can figure it out when you do their sexual history and you understand how the sexual history is about understanding how you became the sexual being that you are.
Yeah.
And and so you look at their history, and perhaps they didn't have any boundaries with their parents. There's all kinds of abuse, and overt and covert abuse, by the way. Sexual abuse does not always mean a person was touched, but a parent who was overly sexual around a child, or just
Hmm.
something felt creepy or not right, or mom
Yeah.
undressed in front of a child all the time in a seductive way,
Mhm.
but may have never touched the child.
You don't really think about
So that is, yeah, so that, but it can be just as damaging. And they look at now at porn that they feel embarrassed about, but it's just de-shaming for people,
that. Hmm.
and helping them to understand why.
Hmm.
And you really can't change what turns people on.
Yeah.
And to understand that's okay, that's private, that's for you.
Yeah.
I'm talking about within the bounds of the law.
Yeah.
I do not work with child abusers in that way. And if
Yeah.
somebody came into my practice, I would refer them out if I got a call about that, because that's just not a place where I'm comfortable going. But
Hmm.
there are people that can work with those people,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So um, yeah.
Wow. So I'm going to get a little bit more granular here, but like when you have a couple that's in front of you and they're struggling with their sexual intimacy, and maybe their lives are pretty good out, outside of that, they communicate, they do date nights, they do things, but they're struggling in this room. Can you give us an idea of like what kind of suggestions you would make or things that would help?
Yeah, that's actually one of the most common presentations. Like,
Mm.
yeah, we like each other, we're good friends, we co-parent well,
Yep.
but our sex life has just taken a dive. And I still do the whole sexual history,
Mhm.
understand what's going on, because there could be things earlier in their lives that are informing now.
Mhm.
And it could just be, yeah, we've been married for 20 years and the
Yeah.
kids are a handful, and it's
Yeah.
hard to find the time, and it's hard to even find the desire. um, and there's this great concept from research out of Canada. These wonderful, mostly women sex therapy researchers up in Canada apparently funds sex therapy research.
Oh.
So and it may sound very simple, but it is the concept of willingness.
Oh.
um, you don't have to
Mhm.
have desire for
Mm.
sex to begin. Sex does not have to end in orgasm. It can end in pleasure. It can end in feelings of connection. Um, One of my mentors in the sex therapy world, her name is Suzanne Iasenza. She defines sex. I love her definition of sex. She defines sex as anything you wouldn't do with your neighbor. And so sometimes it is,
Love it.
yeah, it's redefining sex,
Yeah.
especially as couples get older,
Yeah.
because bodies change and sometimes parts don't work, and
Yeah.
penises don't get as hard or don't stay
Yeah.
hard, or vaginas don't lubricate. And so um, it is creating menus,
Yeah.
sexual menus, so that there can be different options. Um, by the partners create the menus.
Okay.
The concept of willingness and finding the time, prioritizing and making the time for that with your partner.
Yeah, that's a huge thing, right? Not just and time for all of it, really, right? Like sometimes people just like to get in and get out, and sometimes you need that extra time to really connect. I think
Mhm.
is helpful too, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
well, that's really good. So I've been talking recently on my show a lot about faking orgasms. I'm sorry, this is a little off topic. I didn't send you this question, not trying to throw you
No, that's
off, just
okay.
came
No,
to
no, no,
mind. And so, I think that we've been talking about this a lot and kind of my girlfriend and I we co-host together sometimes, and she's just like, why do women fake it? And then all you're doing is kind of setting yourself up for, the guy to think he's doing great, right? Of course, along
yeah,
all the time, and you are not getting pleased yourself. But it can be
yeah,
a very uncomfortable situation as well if you're not to have, maybe you're not ready to have that conversation, or you're trying not to make them feel
yeah.
bad. What's your
Yeah.
thoughts on that? Do you ever give advice on kind of faking
Uh,
it or not, or
Nobody's ever asked me that question. It is something that came up once. I will tell you, as I said, I asked people to please, give me the permission to keep this private. And
yeah.
one woman said to me once, I have not had an orgasm with him in 10 years, but I don't want him to know that.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so, but there were other issues in that
Yeah.
relationship. That's why it was because of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was something that was a secret,
Yeah.
that I
Do
that
you
I
think that's
held.
unhealthy for her to continue that? Or is that
It's
something
really
you
all,
explore?
there's so much to do with context. So when I hear that, oh, so you always fake your orgasms, well, some women are not able, they can have an orgasm on their own when they
Yeah.
masturbate.
Yeah.
They're unable to have an orgasm with their partner.
Yeah.
And so that's a whole area of exploration. Um, Maybe they're faking it because they're not really enjoying the sex, so they just want it to be done with.
Yeah.
And so they're like, also at the beginning of one of those Sex in the City movies, she's like, "Well, are you done yet?" And he's like, "Oh God, that's what it's like for you."
Yeah,
And so,
exactly.
yeah. I don't like to look at things as healthy, unhealthy. Is it useful? Is it not useful? And how can we understand this more?
Yeah.
Women who are anorgasmic with partners, a lot of times that can be about trust,
Mm.
not necessarily with their partner, but what happened in their past, that sexual or not, right? Oftentimes, something that happened in someone's past. Let's say a woman grew up in a very chaotic home,
Hmm.
and so she coped, and um, she coped with that environment by keeping everything very organized and straight, and nothing got out of order,
Yeah.
right? And sex is messy. Orgasm is about letting go.
Yes.
And when you grew up in an environment that was maybe no sexual abuse, but there was no trust in that environment, and
Yeah.
the environment was wild. Well, the thought of letting go
Mm.
in the presence of another person can be,
Very.
again, this is unconscious, it's not conscious, but
Mhm.
that could very much impact in that way. So I'm always curious. Tell me about that. Oh, so you don't orgasm with your partner. Tell me about that. Or you're faking it. Tell me about that. Well,
Yeah.
I can't orgasm with. I've never had an orgasm with a partner. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that happens more often than we probably even know. And again, it's just the fear of letting go, or, showing a different side of you. That can be a very scary thing. And, sometimes, yeah, you just want it to be done. It's easier just to do that, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so what kinds of things, just talking about like a healthy sex life, or what kind of things do you suggest people do to kind of spice it up, whether it's in a marriage or just a dating situation?
Yeah. Well, I think the sexual menus are a really important piece. Um, when we get to the sexual menu part, after I've done the sexual and relational history with each partner,
Mhm.
I will ask them to create a menu everything from the most vanilla to the kinkiest thing you can think of that you might like to do. And again, this comes from, I have to give credit to Suzanne Iasenza again, because this is her model that I have learned from her.
Yeah.
But what is it, anything. Now, just like when you go to a restaurant, you get a menu.
Yeah.
Not a, you don't necessarily like the same thing. So there may be things that are eliminated from the menu,
Uh-huh.
but talk about it, converse about it. One thing that the vanilla sex world can learn from the kinky sex world, the BDSM sex world, um, they talk about it because they have to be safe,
Yes.
because there's potential danger. So they literally have lists of things like, what do you like, what don't you like, what's a maybe, what's a totally no. They
Mhm.
talk about sex very openly because they have to for
For
safety.
safety, yeah.
Whereas most people, generally in the population, couples do, as you said in the beginning, there's more like taboo. It's harder to talk about it. What do you like? What don't you like? What turns you on? So we have to be curious about our bodies and our partners' bodies, and expand that definition of sex, and do sexual menus, and could be just taking a bath together. Hopefully you
Yeah.
wouldn't take a bath with your neighbor,
Yeah.
maybe eating erotica together, or I've had so many couples come in where one partner likes kissing, the
Yeah.
other partner doesn't, and so one of them wanted like had a whole like kissing appetizer on
Yeah.
his menu, and
Interesting.
um and and she was willing to do that. So um yeah.
I like that idea. It's probably fun to create some new stuff that you can do and create maybe, yeah, your own little menus and share them and things that you would like to try with each other or enjoy. I think that's a really neat idea to kind of keep
Mm.
that going. So when we talked a little bit about, with masturbation and vibrators, and lately I've been talking about how sometimes these can be such a hindrance at times to your sex life because you can tend to gravitate more towards that, especially if you're not orgasming during sex and you can with the vibrator, right? Or you want to just make it easy and quick that way.
Yeah.
How do you feel about kind of that? Or do you kind of say to limit it a little bit or?
Bring the vibrator into the bedroom with your partner,
Yeah, I like that. But some are so weird about it. I don't know why. I would think it would kind of enhance it. You enjoy it together and,
uh,
that kind of thing. I guess it's just more feeling a little inadequate, maybe.
no, I
Right?
go to a sex store with your partner.
Hmm.
uh, Go look at what's out there, play around, play. Like that's one of the things that could be on the menu.
Yeah, I like
Yeah, have
that idea.
open discussion about it. And it can be very erotic between people
Yeah. And they make
to
so many now that work both for both of you together that you could do that. I would think
yeah.
you enjoy it together.
There's some that are even remote, like there can be something inside of a woman, and the man can, or the partner, the female partner or the male partner or the
Yeah.
non-binary partner can press a button somewhere and send
Wow.
a little bit of a
Can you imagine you're cleaning at home and he's at work and he presses the button? You're like, whoa. That would kind of be a fun thing. You don't know when it's going to hit.
exactly, and it could be foreplay for the
Yeah.
day.
I would be
They have
totally out for
scheduled
that.
in some sex for that evening, and he's there just getting ready,
Yeah.
being apart. But yeah.
I love it. I would totally do that. I would. That'd be fun. So I'm sure you often get different cultural and individual, different backgrounds coming in. And so when you're working with couples from diverse backgrounds, how does that work with like their belief systems and different things? Do you have to kind of be in the knowledge of all of that before you can address it?
Yeah, there's no way I can be in the knowledge of everything. If I do have a couple from a specific ethnic group, I'll do some reading and
Yeah.
understanding about it, whether it's sex, whether it's relational. The culture is a very important part of context when
Yeah.
you look at what 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 is the universe that this couple is in,
Mhm.
right? And culture is huge,
Yeah.
as I'm sure you can imagine what if they are Asian culture of some sort is very different from, uh, um, I don't know,
Just normal.
Hispanic culture, it's just
Yeah,
from our American culture,
yeah,
even how do the cultures blend, right? And if it's American, but American Chinese or American Jewish or American Catholic or fundamentalist American religious beliefs with somebody who's not a fundamentalist, even differences within the couple and how that manifests as well. Those
yeah.
are really all important pieces.
Yeah, I would imagine that would be very, very tricky, especially if you have two from two different cultures, and that can probably be often an issue within the marriage itself or within the intimacy if they're very
Yeah.
different in their
You know,
upbringing.
I'm recalling a couple of couples I've had where one couple was just, you'd think this would, well, this won't be that much of a difference, you know, two white people, one's from the UK and one's from the US, but it is very different,
Yeah.
the culture there, and the fact that somebody's been displaced from their country of origin and they don't have that family system
Mm,
around as well.
yeah, a
So,
lot of
so
contributors to that.
culture and ethnicity is a and the belief systems that go with that are all, it's all grist for the mill, that it's all very important to respectfully explore that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So what role does communication play into your approach? Is that pretty high up there? And how do you help couples to improve their communication? What's something
Yeah.
you would do in that case?
You know, as I said in the beginning when we talked about that vulnerability cycle,
Hmm.
um, that highlights what happens between people, right? And so if one person is shutting down, because a lot of times people say, yeah, we don't communicate, but what does that mean? Like, what does it mean that you don't communicate?
Yeah,
Uh, so again, I'm looking for what happens between them
yeah,
and understanding, well, why do you shut down? You know, or I don't like the word why, you
right.
know, understanding how this person shuts down, making sense of it in the history of their family,
Yeah.
perhaps the one who, if there's one who shuts down,
Mhm.
and helping that person to begin to stay present. Because the truth is, somebody shuts down and leaves, that's communication.
Yeah.
That's not communication. They're saying, I'm out of here. I don't want to talk about this. Goodbye. Whether they
Kind of
go
like
in
no
another
answer is an
room.
answer. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, so it is finding more useful ways because that's just not useful. So it's first it's understanding what does happen. What
Hmm.
does happen? What if they're not talking to each other? I There are couples who come in. Occasionally I get them for couples therapy, not usually. Usually it's more for sex because
Hmm.
there's couples that but sometimes just for relational stuff. Couples that they don't, nobody confronts each other. So
Mm.
maybe there's upsetness, but nobody, there's no arguing, there's nothing. No, they just circle in their, no, oh no, they're both unhappy about something, but they're in their own universes, right? So
Yeah.
how is it? Again, I look at the family history, um, what happened in their life, how did they cope with that, and what survival strategies have they taken with them? Because we all do that. We all take our survival strategies that we develop in the families we grow up in, and we unconsciously bring them into our adult relationships. But the context has changed and they're not always useful there,
Wow.
right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and I think sometimes communication, I had heard it on a podcast or something I was listening to, and the woman said that, yeah, we communicate all the time, but it's so basic and surface level. Yes, he calls me, how was your day? When are you going to be home? What are we going to do tonight? That kind of communication. And people tend to think, yeah, we communicate, right? But there's nothing that goes beyond that line. And I
yeah,
think that's
I've
where
heard that a lot.
people really need to focus and get deep. And I tend to like to do little in dating, once I start dating somebody, I'll bring little questions. I've been known
Yeah,
to type out all these questions and cut them up,
yeah,
put them in a little baggie, and we go to dinner. And while we're waiting for our food, it's like, okay, pick out a question.
yeah,
And we just
great
kind of,
idea.
yeah, I'll do little things like that just to kind of keep the conversation flowing or ask things that you wouldn't ask normal basis. So I think it's
How do they respond to that? How do your dates
pretty
respond?
good, actually. Yeah, it started to be, I was dating a guy for a while, and so we had a Wednesday date night. And so I
Uh-huh,
would always come out with my little baggie, and we would just do 3 questions each, and it
uh-huh.
opened up the dialogue. And I remember a couple times the waiter or waitress would be like, I love what you guys are doing. What's it all about? And asking questions. And so
Yeah,
he was open to it because it was already our set date night. So to me, it was part of it. It wasn't like he just came home from work and I'm like, pick a question at the front door. So
right,
yeah,
right,
I
yeah,
think it was great. And it helped me to learn a few more things, about him. And I think that's what was important instead of just sitting there talking about,
yeah,
nothing. Might as well use the time wisely, right? So
yeah. And so, did you ever encounter people that are like, I don't know, well,
no, no,
oh,
and
no,
I didn't
oh,
do it too often. Like it was really with somebody that I'd been with for a little bit of time, to kind of get to know some of the
uh-huh,
deeper stuff that because I don't want to know too much deep stuff on a first date every time. But often no, they were pretty easy going about it. Some think it's fun. And usually it's the ones that are, looking for that they do well with communication anyway. And so they're looking for that kind of conversation.
yeah,
I think it's
yeah,
hard with ones that are already shut down. It's a little bit harder to bring it out of them. But
yeah, yeah,
it just felt more fun in like an environment of just being, at a restaurant or something where it was just easy going and hey, let's ask some questions about each other. And they weren't anything like that they'd be embarrassed to say,
uh-huh,
just like
uh-huh,
what was your favorite thing to do with your dad growing up or something,
uh-huh.
just to kind of learn a little bit more.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, it
it's a
was
great
really
question.
interesting. It was
Yeah,
fun. So, okay, so on my show, I kind of talk about putting yourself back out there after divorce is a big thing. Um, I think it's often very scary for, people, especially in our world today. I mean, I was married for 20 years and then, got divorced and came out thinking, hey, I'm just going to start dating. I'm going to meet somebody at the grocery store. It just doesn't happen like that. So now we have this whole online dating nonsense and it's
yeah,
crazy and it's a different world because I think there's so much temptation. There is just, you're caught up talking to multiple people at one time. I mean, do you have a lot of people that come in talking about this kind of thing? And what would be your advice for any of my
yeah,
listeners
yeah.
how to deal with it?
I think you have to do it at your pace
Mhm.
when you're ready.
Yeah. Is there a time
There is
frame there? I
no
know you're saying when
honesty
you're
or
when you're ready, but like, is it like I wouldn't suggest coming out in a month later. You're just like, okay. I mean, I don't know. Maybe that works for
well,
some
no,
people, but take time for
it
yourself,
it
right?
it 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 really depends so much, like if they were in a previous relationship.
Yeah.
Had it died a long time ago and
Yeah.
you were just going through emotions, and you're finally out and you're ready because you've been mentally preparing for that for a long time,
Yeah.
or is it something that was so traumatic and you were just dragged through the mud for, it really, it depends. And
Yeah.
I I cannot point to one time frame that is right.
Yeah.
I think people have to kind of feel that out for themselves. And I think a lot of times there's a pressure from society that, oh, well, why aren't you dating? You should be dating. But if you're not ready to date, or you don't feel ready to, there's nothing wrong with you,
Yeah.
right? It's okay.
Yeah.
You're listening to your instincts.
Hmm.
Um, yeah.
Absolutely.
So I
How do
can't
you
give a hard fast answer on that one.
No,
Yeah.
that's okay. That's okay. That's kind of what I was thinking. I mean, it's each person, in their own way and their own time, I think. But I always would recommend to not wait too long though, because you can be very comfortable being
Yeah.
alone and not letting somebody in your space is a very difficult
Yeah,
thing after a period
absolutely.
of time, right?
And I would say if you find yourself maybe like thinking about it, but it's just fear
Hmm.
that's holding you, then open to that. Open to
Yeah.
that fear and explore it. I think it's a really good idea to do some therapy at that time. One, so you don't maybe repeat some negative cycle that you had with the person before where it didn't work out right, or if your choices in life have always led you to be with someone where you just don't feel comfortable, do some personal work,
Yeah.
and so you can learn why do I keep choosing a person that's like this?
Yeah.
Um, and how can I understand that better?
Yeah.
Because I don't want to do that again.
Yeah. And what's your thoughts on these dating sites? Do you usually recommend them to people, or how do you recommend, or do you
Yeah,
recommend?
I think I think I have a son who got married almost 2 years ago, and they met on he and his
Ah,
wife on a dating site, and
hit or miss, right?
yeah, so I think there are different ones. Some are more, as I understand it. I've been married for 33 years, so
Oh,
I haven't
yes, it's
been
amazing.
in that world. But some I understand are more serious. Some are more
Mhm.
like hookup sites.
Yeah.
There are dating sites that are for trans folks. There are dating sites that are for kinky folks.
Yeah.
So there's all different things. So yeah, I think probably, if I was a single person today, I would look into that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, it's
yeah.
interesting. It can be fun for a little while. I just think it's like get on it for a little bit and then get off. Otherwise, you get stuck.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Well, gosh, that is such amazing information. I really enjoyed, hearing about that. I've always kind of wondered about like the sex therapy part of it and how that, how deep it goes or what things you tend to talk about. So thank you for coming on to talk
Oh,
to
of
me about all
course.
of that. So before you go, I have a little fun game called From Mrs. to Ms. Fast Facts. It's just a this or
Uh-huh.
that. Very easy, just relationship stuff. I'm going to throw two things at you, and you just tell me the first one that comes to your mind that you like. Okay, so number one, home cooked dinner or romantic restaurant date?
Both.
Right?
Oh, which one I like
Yes.
personally?
What would you
Oh, me
prefer?
personally, a home cooked dinner.
Home cooked dinner. Oh, you like kind of like a home thing. Okay,
Yeah,
movie night in or a night out on the town? This may go with the home cooked dinner.
right
Night
in.
in.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
here's a tricky one. A one night stand with someone you've crushed on or a relationship with someone you're feeling just okay about? Which would be better for you? Take aside that you've been married for
Oh, that's
years.
different. That's I'm I'm gonna say if I wasn't married, I'd take the
Uh-huh.
one night stand.
Yeah,
But not necessarily. I don't want to be with the okay-ish, but
yeah.
I'm not really a one night
A one night
person.
stand either. That was a tricky one. That was a tricky one.
Yeah,
Okay, are you more of a future plans or present moments?
present moments.
An early morning hike or a lazy Sunday morning in bed?
Lazy Sunday morning in bed.
Yeah, that's good. Would you prefer love notes or surprise gifts?
Love notes.
Hmm. An intimate conversation or playful banter?
Intimate conversation and playful
It's
banter.
playful.
I like that.
Yeah. Okay, spontaneous intimacy or planned intimacy?
Either one. And
Yeah.
I'm really either one.
Yeah.
Intimacy, if it happens spontaneously, great. But if you plan it, that can be fun too.
A lot of people do that. They plan like, okay, we're gonna have sex every the third Wednesday of the month. Is that kind of a thing?
Or it can be, or it could
Yeah.
just be like, hey, we have time between when the kids are home and the kids are going out at night. Let's get together that like this on this Saturday,
Yeah.
Joey and Susie are going out to friends' houses, so let's
Yeah, we have 1 hour.
take advantage of that. Yeah, we have an hour.
I love that. That's funny. Okay, two more. Number nine, lights on or off during sex?
Dim.
Dim. Yes, that's how I am. I'm like, open the closet door at least. And the last one, whispered sweet nothings or bold declarations of desire.
I'd say whisper sweet nothings.
Sweet. Now, are you and your husband, you've been married for 33 years, you have kids?
We
Yeah.
have grown sons. Yeah.
Okay, okay. Wow.
Married, and one is 29, turning 30 this year. He lives out in California,
Uh-huh.
unfortunately. But
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
California, right? You're in
Yeah, I'm in
California.
California too. Yep, yep. It's
I'm
nice
on the
weather.
East Coast, so yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, 33 years. Well, congrats. That's amazing. That's a long time. That's a long time to be with somebody. So, well, thank you so much, Wendy, for joining me today. I loved having you on and talking all about, the individual and family and couples and sex therapy. I think it's super important and people need to definitely use as an option when they're coming down that road and think something needs to happen. One thing I just wanted to go back and ask you real quick, because I think you mentioned about when people come to you, you kind of ask them like, why at this point? Like, why, if you've been arguing for all this point, what are most of their answers on that?
Yeah, it can vary. It can be our children are getting old enough and we don't want to show them this as relationship. It
Ah,
could be an affair or some
yeah,
other betrayal. It could be often the kids are launched.
yeah,
And now, the last one went off to college and now it's just us. And we're like, we really don't have anything in common. Like we don't talk to each other. Everything was around the kids. It could be there was some big eruption in the family
yeah.
and somebody said something somewhere and there's this whole it's so many things.
Interesting. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah, I think those would all be really big things for sure. Well, great. You guys can find Wendy Dumbroff. Tell us some of your handles of where they can find you on certain things. I'll also post them on the episode.
Oh, thank you. I think probably the best place to find me is my website, which is wendydumbroff.therapy.com. It's Wendy with an I, just,
Okay.
Wendy
And spell
Dumbroff
Dumbroff
Therapy.
for them, maybe just so they know.
Yes, I know there's the person who like manages my website throws stuff. I have a Facebook page out there, but I couldn't
Yeah,
tell you the exact
that's
handle.
okay. I'm going to
Um,
post it, yeah, in the details in the episodes so that they can find you. It's so great to talk to you. You have so much important information and very insightful. So thank you so much for joining me for that. You
okay.
guys, I appreciate you listening in. I love having guests like this. So there's a lot more coming. You can find me on Instagram and TikTok at From Mrs. to Ms. You can email me with any suggestions, comments, questions, anything you have at info@FromMrsToMs.net. And I hope you guys have a wonderful week. We will see you next week. Bye. I'm just gonna